Loyalty is a luxury bought with cold cash, but betrayal is always free. When the city's most ruthless kingpin staged his own deathbed, he expected his soon-to-be wife to show her true colors. He just didn't expect the quiet girl changing his bedsheets to rewrite all his rules. The hardest part about playing dead is the itch. Dominic lay perfectly motionless on the California king bed, his spine aching against the high-density mattress. The master suite of his sprawling Long Island estate had been hollowed out and refitted into a private intensive care unit. Machines whirred and clicked in a rhythmic, sterile chorus. The ventilator pumped with a mechanical sigh, though the tube taped to his mouth was a prop, carefully positioned by Dr. Evans, the only man on his payroll who knew the truth. Dominic's breathing was slow, measured. 8 inhales a minute. He had trained his body to mimic the shallow respiration of a brain-dead man. He kept his eyes shut, letting his other senses paint the room. He smelled her before he heard her. Chanel No. 5, layered over the sharp, sour tang of gin. The heavy oak door clicked shut. High heels snapped against the imported Italian marble, the rhythm impatient, agitated. Chloe, his fiancée. The woman who was supposed to merge the Russo family with the remnants of the old Irish syndicates. She didn't walk to his bedside. She didn't reach for his hand. Instead, the distinct squeak of the leather armchair by the window echoed in the room. A lighter flicked. The smell of tobacco smoke joined the perfume and gin. "Yeah, I'm looking at him right now," Chloe said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the honeyed warmth she usually reserved for gala dinners and paparazzi flashes. "He looks like a corpse, Tommy. The doctor says there's zero brain activity. It's just meat keeping the sheets warm." Dominic's heart rate threatened to spike. He forced it down. He visualized ice water running through his veins, a technique an old enforcer had taught him a decade ago. On the monitor beside him, the green line remained steady. Meat keeping the sheets warm. It was good to finally hear the truth. It tasted like ash, but it was real. "No, we don't move yet," Chloe continued, exhaling loudly. "If we pull the plug too soon, his capos will smell a rat. Paulie is already pacing the downstairs hall like a rabid dog. We wait until the end of the week. Let the family grieve. Let them get tired. Then I give the order, I inherit the voting rights, and we hand the docs over to your crew." A pause. A soft, cruel laugh. "Don't worry about the maid. She's deaf and dumb as far as I can tell. She just mops the floor." The door opened again. The heavy footsteps of Paulie, Dominic's underboss. "Miss Chloe," Paulie's gruff voice rumbled. "Doctor says visiting hours are over. He needs rest." "Of course, Paulie," Chloe replied, her tone instantly shifting into a fragile, tear-soaked tremor. I can't bear to leave him. He looks so cold." "He's fighting, Ma'am. Boss is a fighter." "I'll pray for him," she whispered. The heels clicked away. The door shut. Dominic lay in the dark. He had suspected a leak for months. Shipments intercepted. Safe houses raided. The drive-by shooting outside his club last Tuesday had been the final straw. They had known exactly where he would be standing. He had taken a graze to the shoulder, ordered Evans to heavily sedate him, and leaked a story of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. A trap baited with his own life. And Chloe had walked right into it. An hour later, the door opened softly. No heels this time, just the soft squeak of rubber-soled sneakers. Tessa. Dominic knew her file. 24. No criminal ties. Hired 3 weeks ago through a legitimate domestic agency. She had a mountain of medical debt from a mother who had passed away a year prior, and a younger brother in college. She needed the exorbitant hazard pay that came with cleaning a Mafia boss's house. He heard the slosh of water in a plastic bucket, the ring of a sponge. She moved around the room quietly, wiping down the medical equipment, dusting the sills. She didn't smell like perfume or liquor. She smelled like bleach and cheap lavender soap. Tessa approached the bed. Dominic braced himself. Most people treated him like furniture now. They bumped his bed, dropped things on his legs, spoke over him. But Tessa stopped. She stood perfectly still beside him. "I know you can't hear me." Her voice was a raspy whisper, barely louder than the hum of the ventilator. "But you shouldn't smoke in here. It's bad for your lungs, even if they're machines right now." He felt the gentle pressure of a warm, damp cloth on his forehead. She wiped away the cold sweat that had gathered during Chloe's visit. Her touch was methodical, but not clinical. It was careful. "My mum looked like this at the end," Tessa murmured, wiping down his cheek, avoiding the tape of the fake tube. "The doctors told us she was gone, but I used to read to her anyway. I think people know when they're left alone. I don't think you should be left alone." She adjusted his blanket, smoothing out a wrinkle that had been digging into his calf for 3 hours. The relief was immediate. "I'll be back tonight," she said. The bucket lifted. The sneakers squeaked away. The door clicked shut. Dominic didn't open his eyes, but for the first time in 6 days, the darkness didn't feel entirely suffocating. By day 9, the house was fracturing. Dominic could hear it through the floorboards. The muffled shouts of his lieutenants arguing in the formal dining room. The heavy thud of fists hitting mahogany tables. Without him at the head of the table, the Russo family was a ship taking on water, and the sharks were circling. His muscles screamed for movement. Atropine drops kept his pupils dilated and fixed when Dr. Evans periodically peeled back his eyelids for the capos to see. He existed in a state of excruciating sensory hyper-awareness. He catalogued every conversation, every footstep, every whispered betrayal. Chloe was getting sloppy. She brought Tommy into the room. Dominic recognized the heavy, dragging left step of Tommy the Hook Callahan, the man trying to usurp his docs. Bringing a rival boss into the inner sanctum was a massive risk, but Chloe was intoxicated by her impending power. "Nice setup," Tommy grunted. Dominic heard the clinking of a glass. Tommy was drinking his rare scotch from the bedside cart. Shame to see a guy like Russo wired up like a science project. "Don't gloat, Tommy," Chloe said sharply. "Paulie is getting suspicious. He wouldn't let me sign the payroll checks yesterday. He says we wait for the boss to wake up." "He ain't waking up," Tommy sneered. Dominic heard the rustle of fabric as Tommy leaned over the bed. He could feel the man's sour breath on his face. "Are you Dom? You're checking out, and I'm taking your city. We need to accelerate the timeline," Chloe said. "Dr. Evans won't budge. I tried to bribe him to up the morphine, but he's a coward. So we don't use the doctor." Tommy's voice dropped an octave. "I got a guy. He slips in tonight, puts a little potassium chloride in the IV heart attack. Natural causes. Completely untraceable. You shed some tears tomorrow morning. We bury him by Sunday, and you sign the docs over to me on Monday." "Tonight?" Chloe hesitated. "Is it clean?" "Cleaner than a priest's conscience. Just make sure the dogs are locked in the kennels and the back gate is unlatched. My guy knows what to do." Dominic's mind raced. Potassium chloride. An untraceable execution. He would have to break the act. He would have to open his eyes, call for Paulie, and trigger the bloodbath prematurely. He hadn't gathered enough evidence to purge all the traitors yet. If he woke up now, the family would split into a civil war. But if he stayed asleep, he would be a corpse by morning. "Fine," Chloe said. "Midnight. I'll make sure the east wing is clear." They left. The room fell silent. Dominic began the agonizing process of waking his dormant muscles. He flexed his toes inside the thick socks. Pain shot up his calves like electric fire. His joints felt filled with wet cement. He had been still for too long. If a hitman walked in at midnight, Dominic wouldn't be able to throw a punch. He barely had the strength to pull the tape off his mouth. At 10 p.m., the door opened. Tessa. She shouldn't have been there. Her shift ended at 8. She moved differently this time. Her steps were hurried, lacking their usual steady rhythm. She didn't bring the cleaning cart. Dominic felt a shift in the mattress as she sat on the edge of the bed. It was highly unprofessional. It broke every rule of her employment. "Mr. Russo," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Dominic." No one called him Dominic in this house, except his enemies. "I know you're not dead," she said. Dominic stopped his heart rate control. The monitor gave a soft, rapid trill, betraying his sudden adrenaline spike. "I saw the doctor adjusting the monitor yesterday," Tessa continued, her words tumbling out in a rushed, terrified stream. "He disconnected the main lead before he pinched your arm, and I've been watching your chest. You breathe too evenly. My mother fought for every breath. You're pacing yourself." Silence stretched. Dominic weighed his options. He could open his eyes. He could silence her. "I was in the hallway," she breathed, leaning closer. He could smell the cheap lavender soap again. "When your fiancé was here with that man, I heard them. Potassium chloride. Midnight." She took a shaky breath. "I packed my bag. I was going to leave. I walked all the way down the driveway to the front gate. It's not my business. You people, you kill each other. That's what you do. If I stay, they might kill me too." Dominic waited. "So why are you here?" he thought violently. "Run, girl." "But you're entirely helpless," she said, her voice cracking. "And I know what it feels like to be lying in a bed, entirely helpless, while people make decisions about your life." He felt her fingers wrap around his hand. Her skin was rough, calloused from hard labor, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "I locked the east wing door from the inside. I jammed a chair under the handle. I'm going to stay right here. If someone comes in, I'm going to scream until every guard in this house comes running. I needed you to know you aren't alone." She let go of his hand and moved away from the bed. He heard the heavy drag of the oak dresser being pushed across the marble floor. She was barricading the bedroom door. Dominic's chest tightened, not with fear, but with a profound, staggering shock. Loyalty was a commodity he bought with millions. He secured it with fear, blood oaths, and violence. Yet here was a girl making minimum wage, putting herself between a Mafia hitman and a dead man, simply because it was the right thing to do. He focused all his energy on his right hand. He needed to move. He needed to be ready. Midnight was coming. The digital clock on the bedside table flipped to 12:14 a.m. The house was deathly quiet. Downstairs, the guards were either bribed, distracted, or asleep. Chloe had done her work well. Dominic was awake beneath his eyelids. He had managed to twitch his fingers, slowly curling them into a fist, battling the intense cramps that seized his forearms. He had subtly shifted his head a fraction of an inch, enough to loosen the stiff muscles in his neck. From the corner of the room, he heard Tessa's ragged breathing. She was sitting on the floor behind the leather armchair, clutching something metallic. Likely the heavy brass fire poker from the suite's decorative hearth. A soft scraping sound echoed from the heavy oak door. Someone was turning the handle. It caught on the lock. A pause. Then a sharp, metallic click. A picked lock. The door pushed inward, groaning against the weight of the heavy dresser Tessa had shoved against it. The gap widened inch by inch. A sliver of pale hallway light sliced across the dark room. "Move," a gruff, muffled voice muttered from the other side. A heavy shoulder slammed into the wood. The dresser scraped loudly against the marble, screeching like a wounded animal. The gap widened enough for a man to slip through. Dominic kept his breathing steady, tracking the intruder entirely by sound. Soft soles, heavy footfalls. The man was big. He moved with practiced, chilling efficiency, stepping past the displaced dresser and approaching the bed. The smell of ozone and stale cigarette smoke reached Dominic's nose. "Night-night, boss," the hitman whispered. Dominic heard the sharp snap of a syringe cap being removed. He felt the mattress depress as the man leaned over the IV line. Dominic braced to strike. He would only have one shot. His muscles were weak. If he missed the man's throat, he was dead. Suddenly, a shadow lunged from the corner. "Get away from him!" Tessa screamed. The sound was raw, feral, tearing through the sterile silence of the room. Before the hitman could react, a heavy metallic thwack cracked through the air. The man grunted in pain, stumbling back as the brass fire poker struck his shoulder instead of his head. "You stupid bitch!" the hitman snarled. Dominic opened his eyes. The room was bathed in the harsh, rhythmic glow of the medical monitors. Standing between his bed and a massive, leather-jacketed killer was Tessa. She was trembling so violently her knees knocked together, holding the heavy fire poker with both hands. Her uniform was crumpled, her hair clinging to her sweaty face. The hitman didn't draw a gun. A gunshot would ruin the narrative of a natural heart attack. Instead, he pulled a switchblade from his pocket. The steel caught the monitor's light, glowing sickly green. "I'll gut you quietly, then finish him," the killer hissed, lunging forward. Tessa swung the poker wildly. The hitman caught the brass rod with his left hand, wincing as the metal bit into his palm, but he wrenched it out of her grasp. Tessa stumbled forward, off balance. The killer raised the knife. Dominic moved. It wasn't a graceful leap. It was a chaotic, desperate surge of sheer willpower. He ripped the fake ventilator tube from his mouth, tearing the tape off his skin. He grabbed the heavy cast-iron IV pole beside the bed. With a guttural roar that scraped his unused vocal cords raw, Dominic vaulted off the mattress. His weak legs buckled instantly, but momentum carried him forward. He swung the base of the IV pole like a baseball bat. The heavy iron connected squarely with the back of the hitman's knees. Bone cracked. The killer howled, his legs folding beneath him. He crashed to the marble floor, the switchblade clattering out of reach. Dominic didn't stop. Operating on pure, blinding adrenaline, he scrambled onto the fallen man. He pinned the killer's chest with his knee, grabbed the man's leather collar, and drove a vicious, short punch into his jaw. Once, twice. The killer's head snapped back against the floor. He went limp. Silence slammed back into the room, broken only by Dominic's ragged, gasping breaths. He stayed on the floor for a long moment, staring down at the unconscious man. His entire body was shaking, his muscles screaming in agony. The heart monitor, attached to his finger, was shrieking a continuous, high-pitched alarm. Slowly, Dominic lifted his head. Tessa was backed against the wall, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. She looked at the blood on his knuckles, then up to his face. He was dressed in a flimsy hospital gown, pale, hollow-eyed, looking like a ghost dragged back from hell. Dominic reached over and ripped the sensor off his finger. The alarm died. He forced himself to stand. His knees wobbled dangerously, but he locked them. He looked at the unconscious assassin, then the syringe rolling lazily across the floor, filled with clear, lethal liquid. Finally, he looked at Tessa. "You should have kept walking." Dominic's voice was a gravelly rasp, barely a croak after days of silence. Tessa swallowed hard, pressing her shoulders into the wallpaper. You were awake." "I was awake." You let them talk. You let her. I needed to know, Dominic said, coldly, picking up the fallen fire poker and leaning his weight on it like a cane. He stepped over the hit man and approached her. I needed to know exactly who was digging my grave. He stopped a few feet from her. He studied her face. She wasn't an operator. She wasn't a player in his game. She was a civilian who had just crossed a line she could never uncross. You risked your life, Dominic said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Why? I told you, she whispered, a tear finally spilling over her lashes. No one deserves to die alone in the dark. Dominic stared at her. In his world, every action had a price tag. Every favor had a hook. But he saw nothing in her eyes but raw, terrifying sincerity. Heavy, frantic footsteps thundered up the stairs outside. The sound of shouting, Paulie's voice roaring orders. The barricaded door shook violently as someone hammered their fists against it. "Boss!" Paulie bellowed from the hallway. "Boss, the monitors! Open the door!" Dominic didn't look away from Tessa. He reached into his pocket, the one he had secretly prepared days ago, and pulled out a heavy, platinum money clip, thick with $100 bills. He held it out to her. Tessa looked at the money, then shook her head. She didn't reach for it. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. Dominic slowly lowered his hand. He understood. You couldn't buy what she had just given him. "Go to the bathroom," Dominic ordered, his voice shifting back to the commanding, authoritative tone of a man who ruled a city. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. When this night is over, you are under my protection. You, your brother, forever. Do you understand?" Tessa nodded once, quickly. She turned and hurried into the ensuite bathroom, the lock clicking solidly into place. Dominic turned back to the bedroom door. The pounding was getting louder. Wood began to splinter. He looked down at the unconscious hitman, then dragged his gaze to the empty leather armchair where his fiancée had sat, plotting his murder. The numbness in his legs was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The coma was over. Dominic gripped the brass poker, his knuckles white. He walked to the door, kicked the dresser aside with a surge of renewed strength, and unlocked the deadbolt. He threw the doors open. Paulie and 4 armed guards stood in the hallway, their guns drawn, their faces pale with panic. When they saw Dominic standing there, alive, furious, and holding a bloodied iron rod, they froze. "Put the guns away, Paulie," Dominic rasped, a dark, terrifying smile spreading across his face. "And go wake up my fiancée. Tell her the groom is feeling much better." Paulie stood frozen in the doorway. Behind him, the 4 loyal soldiers of the Russo family lowered their weapons, their faces pale masks of disbelief. They were staring at a ghost. Dominic leaned heavily on the brass poker. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving under the thin hospital gown, but his eyes were hard, black stones. The digital monitors continued their rhythmic flashing behind him, illuminating the fallen assassin on the floor. "Boss," Paulie finally managed to choke out. His eyes darted to the unconscious man, then back to Dominic. "We thought... The doctor said..." "The doctor is a dead man walking," Dominic said, his voice a gravelly rasp that demanded total silence. "And you're standing in my hallway asking stupid questions while a rat breathes my air. Drag this piece of garbage down to the cellar, tie him to the steel chair, then lock down the estate. Nobody leaves. Nobody makes a phone call. Jam the cell signals." Paulie's jaw snapped shut. The shock evaporated, instantly replaced by the cold, ruthless efficiency that had made him underboss. He snapped his fingers. 2 soldiers stepped over the threshold, grabbed the hitman by his ankles, and hauled his limp body out of the room. Crimson smeared across the white marble, trailing behind them like a morbid ribbon. "Give me 10 minutes," Dominic ordered, turning his back on them. "Bring me a suit, charcoal. Then go to the East Wing. Wake Chloe up. Tell her the worst has happened, and she needs to come down to the library. Don't let her bring her purse." "Yes, boss." The door pulled shut. Dominic was alone. He dropped the heavy brass poker. It clattered loudly against the floorboards. His legs finally gave out, and he sank onto the edge of the mattress, gripping the sheets to stop his hands from shaking. The adrenaline was receding, leaving behind a tidal wave of exhaustion and physical agony. Every muscle fiber screamed in protest. He forced himself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. He had played a dangerous game, trading his dignity and safety for information. He had won, but the victory tasted like rust and bile. 10 minutes later, a fresh suit lay across the armchair. Dressing was a battle. Pulling the tailored trousers over his weakened legs required supreme effort. Buttoning the crisp white shirt felt like lifting weights. But when he finally slipped the charcoal suit jacket over his shoulders and cinched his silk tie, the transformation was complete. He was no longer a helpless patient. He was the head of the Russo family. Dominic walked out of the suite, not looking back at the locked bathroom door. He had a house to clean first. The library was located on the ground floor. It was a cavernous room, walled with mahogany shelves and smelling faintly of aged paper and expensive cigars. Dominic sat in the high-backed leather chair behind his massive oak desk. He didn't turn on the lamps. He sat in the shadows, pouring himself 3 fingers of amber scotch from the crystal decanter. The liquid burned a welcome path down his raw throat. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Light, hurried, accompanied by the heavy tread of Paulie's boots. The double doors swung open. Chloe stepped inside. She was wearing a silk robe over her nightgown. She held a lace handkerchief to her face, her shoulders shaking in a perfectly executed pantomime of grief. "Oh, Paulie," she sobbed, not yet looking into the dark corners of the room. "I knew it. I felt it in my heart. He's gone, isn't he? My poor, brave Dominic." She stepped further into the library. Paulie closed the doors behind her, staying inside, his hand resting casually over the bulge of his shoulder holster. "He was fighting so hard." Chloe wept, dabbing her dry eyes. "We have to call Tommy Callahan. We need allies now, Paulie. The family is vulnerable." "Are we, Chloe?" The voice cut through the darkness like a serrated blade. Chloe froze, her entire body locked up. The handkerchief slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the Persian rug. Dominic leaned forward. The moonlight filtering through the heavy drapes caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the hollows of his cheeks and the absolute zero temperature of his stare. "Dominic," she whispered, the color draining from her face until she looked like porcelain. "The meat is still warm, sweetheart," Dominic said. He took a slow sip of his scotch. "Isn't that what you called me?" "Just meat keeping the sheets warm." Chloe staggered backward, her heel catching on the rug. She bumped into Paulie, who didn't move an inch to support her. Panic, raw and unfiltered, erupted in her eyes. I don't," she stammered, her voice pitching up an octave. "You were dead." "The hemorrhage was a trap," Dominic finished for her. He set the glass down. The sharp clink echoed like a gunshot. "A trap for rats, and you chewed right through the cheese." "Dominic, listen to me." Chloe dropped to her knees, the silk robe pooling around her. The fake tears were gone, replaced by genuine, terrified sobbing. "Tommy forced me. He threatened my family. He said if I didn't help him take the docks, he would kill my sister. I was trying to protect us. You negotiated my murder in my own bedroom while smoking a cigarette," Dominic stated, his tone devoid of any emotion. It wasn't anger driving him now. It was pure, sterile logic. You planned to sign my legacy over to a second-rate street thug for a seat at a table you didn't earn. He pulled a sleek, black burner phone from his jacket pocket. 30 minutes ago, while I was getting dressed, I used your phone, Dominic said, tossing the plastic device onto the desk. I texted Tommy. I told him the hit was successful. I told him to come to the service entrance to confirm. Chloe gasped, covering her mouth. A heavy knock sounded on the library doors. "Bring him in," Dominic ordered. The doors opened. 2 soldiers dragged Tommy the Hook Callahan into the room. Tommy's face was bruised, his expensive leather coat torn. He spat dark saliva onto the floor as they forced him to his knees beside Chloe. Tommy looked up, his sneer faltering instantly when he saw Dominic sitting behind the desk. "You got to be kidding me," Tommy muttered, his chest heaving. "You wanted my city, Tommy," Dominic said quietly. He stood up. His legs ached, but his posture was ironclad. He walked slowly around the desk. "You wanted my docks. You wanted my house." Dominic stopped in front of the kneeling rival boss. "I'm offering you a piece of my estate," Dominic said. "About 6 feet of it, deep in the woods behind the kennels." Tommy lunged forward, roaring, but Paulie's heavy boot slammed into his spine, driving his face into the floorboards. "Take him out back," Dominic commanded. "Don't make a mess on the grass." They dragged Tommy out. The rival boss didn't beg. He knew the rules of the life. Chloe was hyperventilating now, clutching at Dominic's pant leg. "Dominic, please, please, we were supposed to be married. I loved you." Dominic looked down at her. He felt nothing. The woman he thought he knew was an illusion. A ghost constructed from ambition and greed. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have brought a killer into my home," he said quietly. He kicked his leg free of her grasp. "Get up." She scrambled to her feet, shaking violently. "Mafia law says I bury you next to him," Dominic said, stepping back. "But I'm tired of digging holes tonight. You're leaving. You're walking out the front gates right now, exactly as you are. No money, no phone, no coat. You're dead in this city. If you cross the bridge back onto Long Island, Paulie will put a bullet in your head himself. And when Tommy's crew finds out you led him into a trap, they won't be as merciful as I am." "Dominic, it's freezing outside. I have nothing." "You have your life," Dominic replied, turning his back on her and walking to the liquor cabinet. "Consider it a wedding gift." "Paulie, throw her out." Chloe screamed as Paulie grabbed her arm, hauling her toward the doors. Her cries faded down the hallway, echoing through the massive empty house until the heavy thud of the oak front doors silenced them completely. Dominic stood alone in the library. He poured another drink. The house was clean. The traitors were gone. The empire was secure. Yet, as he stared into the amber liquid, the victory felt entirely hollow. Loyalty bought with fear had almost gotten him killed. The only real loyalty he had witnessed in 10 years had come from a girl holding a brass poker, terrified out of her mind, refusing to let a stranger die in the dark. Dominic set the glass down. He left the library and began the long, painful walk back up the stairs. The master suite smelled of bleach, sweat, and spilled secrets. Dominic pushed the splintered door open. The room was empty. The medical equipment stood silent, the monitors finally powered down. The displaced dresser remained skewed across the marble floor. He walked slowly toward the ensuite bathroom. He stood outside the heavy frosted glass door for a moment, listening. He could hear soft, erratic breathing on the other side. He knocked twice. Gentle. "It's me," Dominic said, his voice softer than it had been downstairs. "It's over." A long silence followed. Then, the slide of a deadbolt, the click of the handle. The door pulled open a few inches. Tessa peered out. Her eyes were red-rimmed, wide with residual panic. She looked past him, scanning the empty bedroom, staring at the spot where the hitman had fallen. When her gaze finally shifted back to Dominic, she froze. She was looking at a different man. The helpless patient in the hospital gown was gone. Standing before her was the King of Long Island, clad in a sharp charcoal suit, smelling of scotch and authority. The vulnerability she had protected was erased, replaced by an intimidating, undeniable power. She took a half step backward, instinctively retreating. Dominic noticed the shift. He hated it. "You can come out," he said, stepping aside to give her space. "The house is secure. The people who wanted to hurt me are gone." Tessa gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. She slowly stepped out of the bathroom. She looked incredibly small in the massive, opulent suite. Her cheap cleaning uniform was wrinkled, stained with sweat and grime from the floor. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked. Her voice didn't shake. It was a flat, resigned question. Dominic felt a sudden, sharp ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his strained muscles. "Why would I kill you?" he asked quietly. "Because I know," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself. "I heard everything. I know who you are. I know what just happened downstairs. People like me don't walk away from people like you." Dominic walked over to the leather armchair, the one Chloe had used, and sank into it. He rested his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. He looked up at her, really looked at her. "You aren't a loose end, Tessa," he said. "You're the only reason I'm breathing. I just swung a piece of metal." "You stayed," Dominic corrected, his tone firm. "When every instinct told you to run, you barricaded a door and stood between a monster and a dead man. I have a payroll of 400 men who kill for me. Not a single one of them would have done what you did tonight for free." Tessa looked down at her battered sneakers. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was wrong." "I know." Dominic leaned back, the leather creaking. "That's exactly why you can't go back to mopping floors." She looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion. "You just said you wouldn't hurt me." "I'm not going to hurt you," Dominic said. "But you can't go back to your old life. Chloe knows your face. Tommy's crew might start asking questions about what happened tonight. If you walk out of this house and go back to your apartment, you are a target. They will use you to get to me, or they will punish you for my survival." Tessa's breath hitched. Reality crashed down on her. She had stepped onto a battlefield, and the war wasn't over. "My brother," she gasped, panic flooding her eyes. "He's at NYU. If they find him—" "He's already being moved," Dominic interrupted smoothly. "Before I went downstairs, I made a call. My men picked him up from his dorm 20 minutes ago. He is being relocated to a secure penthouse in Manhattan. His tuition will be paid in full from a blind trust. He is perfectly safe." Tessa stared at him, her mouth slightly open. The sheer speed and reach of his power were terrifying. He had dismantled her entire life and secured her family in the time it took her to hide in a bathroom. "And me?" she whispered. "You stay here," Dominic said. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a prison sentence either. It was a lifeline. "As a maid?" she asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "No." Dominic stood up. He walked slowly across the room, stopping a few feet from her. "You hate my world. You should. It's violent, ugly, and it breaks people. But I owe you my life. In my world, that is a blood debt. It cannot be repaid with a paycheck. You stay here under my personal protection. You are untouchable. Anyone who looks at you sideways answers to me." Tessa searched his face. She looked for the arrogance of a mob boss, but found only the exhausted sincerity of a man who had nearly lost everything. "I don't belong here, Dominic," she said softly, using his name again. The sound of it sent a strange jolt through him. "None of us belong anywhere," Dominic replied, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "We just survive where we land. You landed here. With me." He didn't reach out to touch her. He didn't invade her space. He simply stood there, a towering figure of violence and authority, offering her the only honest thing he had left. "It's going to be dangerous," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Yes. I won't pretend to like what you do. I would be disappointed if you did." Tessa looked at the blood-stained marble floor, then back to the man who commanded the shadows. She had a mountain of debt, a brother to protect, and a life that had been going nowhere. Here, in the belly of the beast, she had somehow found the safest place on Earth. She let out a long, shaky breath, her shoulders finally dropping from their defensive posture. "Okay," Tessa murmured. "I stay." Dominic nodded slowly. The heavy, suffocating weight that had rested on his chest for the last 9 days finally lifted. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He reached out and gently took the cleaning rag from her trembling hand, tossing it onto the floor. "Good," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble. "Now let's get out of this room. It smells like dead men." They walked out into the hallway together. The house was quiet, the storm had passed, and the Empire stood firm. But as Dominic walked beside the quiet girl with the cheap lavender soap, he knew the rules of his world had irreparably changed. He was still the king, but for the first time in his life, he had an anchor. Did you feel that tension? If this dark, grounded Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more intense, gritty audio dramas and thrilling narratives